For those of you joining, we're going to wait just one more minute to make sure we have as many participants who have joined can. All right. I'll wait another 10 or 15 seconds here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I trust we'll have more participants joining. It's great to see everybody logging in. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our third public workshop for the Advanced Clean Cars II regulation development at the California Air Resources Board. My name is Joshua Cunningham. We continue to see this set of regulations on passenger vehicles as critical for the state to address climate change and air quality challenges. The ongoing drought conditions and large wildfires in the western states are clear evidence of the need for strong policy actions. The release this week of the most recent United Nations climate report and President Biden's 2030 electrification executive order last week confirmed this need for strong policy action. In tonight's workshop, our team will present new considerations for the proposed ZEV regulation not shared in prior workshops. We have been developing regulatory provisions that we hope will address environmental justice and the need to increase access to zero-emission technology across all communities. We'll also present new ideas for minimum requirements for fully electric vehicles. As you can tell, we're starting later in the day this time. Our goal is to increase access to our event for those individuals that may not be able to pull away from work during the core business hours. We're also enhancing the process for collecting written comment after the workshop with the intent of expanding public access to the comments that we receive. And I'll note too that we're recording today's workshop and we'll post that at a later point for those who cannot attend today. So we're eager to hear any and all perspectives from participants. To get us going, let me turn this over to Marissa Williams, manager in my program leading the ZEV regulatory efforts. Marissa?
Great, thank you, Joshua. Hello, everyone. My name is Marissa Williams, and I work with Joshua Cunningham in the Advanced Clean Cars branch here at the California Air Resources Board. Welcome to the Advanced Clean Cars II, or as we'll refer to it as ACC II Summer Workshop. Next slide, please. Before we dive into our workshop material today, we want to spend a moment on Zoom orientation. First, please make sure your name is showing as your screen name. To rename yourself in Zoom, click on the top right side of your picture or video icon. Please provide your first name, last name, and affiliation if you are associated with an organization. If you need help, please use the chat function to request assistance from our host or co-host. All attendees will remain on mute. If called on, please unmute yourself using the Zoom mute and unmute button located at the bottom left of your Zoom window. For those of you joining us on the phone, please dial *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Feel free to turn on your video when speaking by clicking the video icon at the bottom left of your screen. Next slide, please. If you would like to provide clarification to a question during our Q&A breaks, please raise your hand. For those in Zoom, click Participants, then Raise Hand. For those on the phone, press *9 to raise your hand. We will check in with the phone line first when we break for Q&A to provide call-in participants an opportunity to ask questions. Next slide, please. The slides we are presenting today are available for download on the Advanced Clean Cars 2 workshop webpage. As a reminder, today's workshop is being recorded. The recording link will be posted on the workshop webpage once it is available. To stay up to date on upcoming events and materials that are posted, please subscribe to our GovDelivery Advanced Clean Cars email list. Next slide, please. There will be 2 breaks during this workshop for questions. Please use the Q&A box to submit your questions throughout the workshop session. Please do not submit questions through the chat. Some of your questions may be answered via the Q&A box, and others will be answered live once we break for Q&A. If you submit a question, we may ask for you to unmute if clarification is needed. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible, but if we don't get to your questions today, please email them to cleancars@arb.ca.gov. Or if you are watching the recording of this webinar and would like to ask staff a question, you can send it to this same email address. Please refer to slide numbers in your questions when possible. Written comments may be submitted using the ACC II workshop number 3 informal comment submittal form. Using this informal public comment form will allow the public to see the comments that have been submitted. Comments can be viewed on the ACC II workshop comments log webpage. If you would like to discuss the Advanced Clean Cars 2 rulemaking with us in more detail after this workshop, please do not hesitate to reach out to us using the cleancars@arb.ca.gov email. Next slide, please. At our last workshop in May, we mentioned that we are actively gathering feedback on ways to increase zero-emission vehicle accessibility for our priority communities, and that we would share more details at our next workshop. As such, today's workshop will start with a discussion of new environmental justice proposals aimed at increasing access to zero-emission vehicles, or ZEVs. After this first agenda item, we will take a break to answer questions. Next, we will discuss additional proposed updates to the ZEV regulation on minimum technical requirements for vehicles to earn ZEB credit. These requirements further help us achieve environmental justice goals. We will also solicit feedback on the appropriate scope and content of the California Act or CEQA analysis to be prepared for this, to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to learn about the Advanced Clean Cars 2 proposals in their entirety. We will provide a summary of all events to date for light duty and medium duty vehicles. We will then take another break to answer questions before finishing up by soliciting feedback on alternatives to the draft regulatory proposals for our economic analysis or standardized regulatory impact assessment, also known as the SRIA. Next slide, please. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, we want to provide context before getting into new proposals on the ZEV regulation. So let's spend a moment highlighting where we have been in the past that has led us to our current path. California has been leading the charge to control motor vehicle emissions for 55 years now by establishing the first tailpipe emission standards in the nation in 1966. Since then, we have developed numerous regulations that require automakers to introduce cleaner cars with more durable emissions controls and to introduce zero vehicles. The first low vehicle regulations in 1990, requiring automobile manufacturers to introduce progressively cleaner light duty and medium duty vehicles from 1994 through 2003 model years. Following a 1998 hearing, CARB amended the low-emission vehicle regulations to further reduce exhaust emissions and to expand the light-duty truck category. Although not shown on the timeline, another critical regulatory development in CARB's history was the approval of the Pavley greenhouse gas, or GHG, regulations in 2004 to require automakers to control GHG emissions from new vehicles for the 2009 through 2016 model years. These were the first regulations in the nation to control greenhouse gas emissions from motor vehicles. And in 2012, CARB adopted the Advanced Clean Cars program that takes us to present day. Next slide, please. The current Advanced Clean Cars program is a collection of several regulations, as identified here, that combine the control of smog-forming criteria pollutants and the control of greenhouse gas emissions. These regulations place requirements on automakers to clean up new vehicles and to promote zero-emission vehicles for passenger cars and trucks. The Zero-Emission Vehicle regulation is designed to achieve the state's long-term emission reduction goals by requiring automakers to offer for sale an increasing number of the very cleanest cars available. These vehicle technologies include battery electric, hydrogen fuel cell, and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. The ZEV regulation is designed as a credit-based regulation, with zero-emission vehicle credit percentage requirements based on an automaker's annual California vehicle production. Automakers earn credits for qualifying ZEVs and plug-in hybrids produced for sale. In 2025, 22% of credits are required under the Advanced Clean Cars I ZEV regulation. The Low-Emission Vehicle Criteria regulation helps reduce air quality impacts by requiring tighter controls on smog-forming and particulate matter emissions that cause adverse health impacts. And the Low-Emission Vehicle GHG regulation helps reduce climate change impacts by requiring reductions in greenhouse gas emissions from driving and air conditioning usage. The Advanced Clean Car I requirements became effective in the 2015 to 2017 timeframe, an increase in stringency through 2025. So where are we headed after 2025? Next slide, please. Deep emission reductions will be needed from all sectors to meet the state's carbon neutrality target and air quality standards. And electrifying all passenger vehicles so that they could substantially contribute to meeting our long-term air quality and climate targets will mean transitioning the fleet to one that is predominantly battery electric and fuel cell electric, with plug-in hybrids still playing a role. The light-duty vehicle targets of Executive Order N7920, calling for all new vehicle cells to be electric by 2025, is a key consideration in CARB's Advanced Clean Cars II rulemaking we are discussing today. Next slide, please. CARB staff are currently working on the next set of regulations under the Advanced Clean Cars II rulemaking that'll take us from 2025 to 2035. The main objective of the Advanced Clean Cars II program is to maximize criteria emission benefits from internal combustion engine vehicles while accelerating the transition to zero-emission vehicles through both increased stringency of requirements and associated actions to support wide-scale ZEB adoption and use. Under the ACC II program, LEV IV will aim to reduce emissions by tightening standards where necessary and pursuing additional requirements that will translate to real-world emission benefits. The ZEV regulation will increase the new vehicle sales requirements to 100% plug-in hybrid electric vehicles and zero-emission vehicles by 2035 in California. Additionally, the ACC II program will aim to ensure that ZEVs are full replacement vehicles for all drivers, for both new and used markets, by adding ZEB Assurance Measures. At the same time, as our transportation system transitions to zero emission, we want to help ensure that everyone can access quality transportation, including new and used electric cars, but also including mobility options that are best suited for individual communities. Next slide, please. Additionally, as part of the ACC II rulemaking, CARB staff have taken actions to implement a more robust environmental justice strategy. CARB staff seek to meaningfully engage with communities and will continue to increase community engagement throughout the rulemaking process with the goal of ensuring that the Advanced Clean Cars II regulations and other supportive programs are aligned with community needs. Through this increased engagement, we hope to gain a better understanding of the impacts of passenger cars in our communities, while we simultaneously seek to broaden the conversation beyond established CARB partners to include voices that have been historically marginalized, such as our underserved communities, rural communities, and tribal communities. As part of this engagement, the CARB regulatory team also hopes to educate communities about the future of electric transportation and what is being done to make these technologies more accessible. For example, to increase engagement, CARB staff conducted a transportation equity community listening session and participate in existing local community and environmental justice coalition meetings to discuss the ACC II rulemaking. Another core environmental justice goal is to strive to disproportionately benefit our impacted communities through the Advanced Clean Cars II regulations, along with complementary policies such as financial incentives, infrastructure build-out, and workforce development. Emission reductions are necessary for improving air quality for everyone, but especially for those who live and work in communities that are disproportionately impacted by air pollution. Disproportionate benefit can in part be achieved by our low-emission vehicle regulations, which have shown through longitudinal emission studies to reduce emission disparity between less and more socially vulnerable communities. The Advanced Clean Cars II program is also increasing focus on the needs of all consumers through our ZEV Assurance and technical minimum requirements. You will hear a summary of these ZEV Assurance proposals again later today, as well as new measures on ZEV minimum technical requirements that CARB staff believe will have environmental justice benefits. CARB staff are also exploring additional provisions that can help achieve more equitable outcomes for our underserved communities through the ZEV regulation. Next slide, please. So what have we heard from the community and the environmental justice advocates we have been engaging with? During our listening session hosted on June 29th of this year, we asked our community members for feedback on ways they thought automakers could best help increase access to electric cars. Of the multiple choice responses, 2 were selected most frequently: that automakers should increase production of electric cars, and that automakers should produce electric cars with more range. Under the ACC II ZEV regulation proposals, automakers will need to increase production of electric cars to ultimately reach 100% of new vehicle sales being electric by 2035. CARB staff are also proposing new minimum requirements for ZEVs receiving regulatory credit that helps address the concern of EV range. At the listening session, we also heard that ZEV affordability is a concern. This concern has also been reiterated by environmental justice or EJ advocates who also would like to see as outcomes of the Advanced Clean Cars II ZEV regulation, both an increase of ZEV ownership of new and/or used ZEVs by community members, and an increase in ZEV mobility and access to ZEV transportation by community members to meet day-to-day transportation needs. Next slide, please. We have also listened to what our community has told us in the past. According to findings from CARB's SB 350, Low-Income Barriers to Clean Transportation report, in making vehicle purchase decisions, clean vehicles are not yet viewed as affordable, reliable, or as convenient as gas counterparts. Residents often lack awareness of clean vehicles and have anxieties and fears of newer technologies, resulting in a reluctance to purchase advanced technology clean vehicles. Next slide, please. Taking in this feedback, part of the ACC II environmental justice strategy is to help ensure zero-emission vehicles meet the same household mobility needs as conventional vehicles, not only when they are sold as new vehicles, but also when they are sold as used vehicles, which is crucial to making ZEVs more accessible. The ZEB Assurance Measures aim to provide some assurance that ZEV technologies are at least as equally good for consumers as gasoline vehicles. Measures like durability, warranty, and serviceability help to hold all vehicles to a level that consumers have come to expect, not just for new car buyers, but for our used car buyers as well. We also believe demystifying ZEVs by increasing transparency will help to build consumer confidence in ZEVs. Current and prospective drivers have a right to understand the vehicle's need for repair and warranty qualifications, and the health of the battery. Additionally, we believe that repair technicians, particularly independent technicians, need to be able to access vehicle data to assess the need for repairs and to maintain high-quality jobs in our communities. Lastly, we cannot ignore the role infrastructure plays, especially as the market expands to those who might be more dependent on public fast charging. CARB staff believe simplifying charging by standardizing the fast charging inlet will further help make ZEVs more accessible. Next slide, please. In addition to the ZEB assurance measures we have presented at previous workshops, CARB staff have continued to investigate other actions we can take within our regulatory framework to help accelerate making the cleanest cars more accessible to our underserved communities. To help achieve the desired environmental justice outcomes we have heard from stakeholders, additional measures were considered that focused on how vehicle manufacturers, who are the regulated party, can be better partners to achieve more equitable outcomes. CARB staff are proposing that optional environmental justice credits be awarded to manufacturers under the Zero-Emission Vehicle regulation who help increase affordable access to ZEVs for our underserved communities. These credits would be for voluntary actions and are not a direct requirement on manufacturers. The environmental justice credits would be a distinct new category of credits under the ZEV regulation that can be earned, banked, traded, and used in model years 2026 through 2031. After model year 2031, these optional EJ credits expire. CARB staff is also proposing a 5% cap on the number of environmental justice credits that can be used in a given year to fulfill a manufacturer's credit obligation under the regulation. During our last workshop in May, staff proposed a 1-for-1 credit structure for battery electric and fuel cell electric vehicles, moving away from a credit structure as we have today, where ZEVs receive different credit based on vehicle range and other attributes. With this simplified structure translating more directly to a sales requirement, one can also think of the environmental justice credits as a vehicle multiplier, as the credits earned are in addition to the base credits received for the vehicle. Next slide, please. There are two categories of optional environmental justice credits CARB staff are proposing today. The first focuses on community-based clean mobility programs, and the second on used ZEVs. I will now turn it over to Cheng Zhuo to provide more detail on the community program category.
Thank you, Marissa. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cheng Zhuo, and I'm staff in the Advanced Clean Cars branch. Today, I will be presenting the Community Program Optional EJ Credit category. Next slide, please. The Optional EJ Credit focused on community programs is intended to increase ZEV mobility and affordable access to clean transportation options for our priority communities. Conceptually, this EJ credit could be earned by manufacturers for each new zero-emission vehicle or plug-in hybrid electric vehicle that they provide at a discount for community-based clean mobility programs. This credit can be earned for 2026 through 2031 model years. Next slide. Let's now discuss what % discount manufacturers would need to provide to earn this EJ credit. CARB staff is proposing that the % discount that is provided off of a new ZEV or PHEV be based on the table provided here. The % discount would increase as the MSRP of the vehicle increases. For vehicles above an MSRP of $20,000, the % discount would start at 10%. This discount would increase 1% for each additional bin of 2,500 MSRP. This would result in a vehicle with an MSRP value of $60,000 needing to be offered at a 25% discount, or $15,000 off of MSRP. For vehicles with an MSRP of $20,000 or less, the % discount is lower at 5%, regardless of the MSRP. While the table here stops at $60,000, CARB staff is not proposing an MSRP cap for the vehicles going into a community program. Next slide, please. First, I would like to note that since this proposal provides manufacturers with EJ credits for the ZEV regulation, the only eligible motor vehicles would be passenger cars and trucks. Additionally, the battery electric vehicles, fuel cell electric vehicles, and plug-in hybrids would need to meet all minimum requirements under the ZEV regulation for earning ZEV or PHEV credits. Those include new minimum requirements proposed for ZEVs that you will hear about later in this workshop. Since this proposal is aimed at providing more affordable clean mobility options for communities, we are proposing to maintain vehicle eligibility requirements that are consistent with our Clean Mobility Options Program and Sustainable Transportation Equity Project. Plug-in hybrids are only eligible for vehicle models with a 6-seat capacity or more. Currently, there are over 20 models of ZEVs and fuel cells that provide various options to meet community program needs. Yet, there are not many options for pure ZEVs with more than 5 seats. By allowing PHEVs at this vehicle size, community programs have a few more options, such as today's Chrysler Pacifica and Mitsubishi Outlander PHEVs. If plug-in hybrids were allowed more extensively in this program, the vehicles would likely need to operate using the internal combustion engine, since the battery range is limited and the vehicles are for shared use, where drivers would be unlikely to stop to charge frequently. Vehicles must also be registered in California, be put into service exclusively for the purposes of operating community-based clean mobility program, and vehicle titles or lease agreements must be held by an organizational entity and not by individual drivers. Next slide, please. Staff is proposing that a new ZEV or PHEV provided at discount for use in a community program may earn EJ credit for model years 2026 through 2031. A manufacturer can earn 0.50 EJ credits for each ZEV provided at a discount and placed in service in a community program, and 0.40 EJ credits for each PHEV. Recall that these EJ credits are in addition to the base ZEV or PHEV credit earned for these vehicles and can be used to fulfill up to 5% of a manufacturer's credit obligation through the 2031 model year. Next slide, please. So what do we mean by a community-based clean mobility program? There are 2 programs currently at CARB that demonstrate the types of projects we anticipate these discounted vehicles feeding into. The Clean Mobility Options Pilot Program, or CMO, provides funding for 2 types of projects: clean mobility projects and community transportation needs assessments. The goal of the CMO program is to improve clean transportation access and to increase zero-emission and near-zero-emission mobility choices for communities. In order to receive CMO funding for clean mobility projects, organizations must conduct a community transportation needs assessment before applying. Needs assessments are used to help identify and understand unmet mobility needs of communities and develop solutions in collaboration with residents. Applicants can then apply for up to $1 million to launch and operate a clean mobility project, such as zero-emission car sharing, carpooling or vanpooling, ride-on-demand services, and innovative transit services. Mobility projects are meant to bridge transportation gaps and provide connectivity between services and locations. Similarly, the Sustainable Transportation Equity Project, also known as STEP, is a pilot that takes a community-based approach to overcoming barriers to clean transportation. STEP's overarching purpose is to provide transportation equity in disadvantaged and low-income communities throughout California via 2 types of grants: planning and capacity building grants and implementation grants. STEP aims to address community residents' transportation needs, increase residents' access to key destinations, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. For a vehicle to be eligible for the optional EJ credits under the Clean Mobility Program category, the community program must meet the eligibility requirements of CMO or STEP, or it must meet the intent of these programs, where there is a community-driven process to determine what clean mobility project best meets the needs of a given community. Let me explain further what this later pathway could look like. Next slide, please. Alternatively, a manufacturer must demonstrate to the reasonable satisfaction of the executive officer that the eligible vehicle will be used as a part of a community-based clean mobility program. The program may include community-identified mobility options that increase access to clean transportation and zero-emission mobility for communities. Some of these mobility programs may include electric car sharing, vanpools and carpooling, innovative transit services, or other clean mobility options as identified by the community. Next slide, please. Given that the intent of this provision is to provide increased access to the cleanest technologies for our environmental justice communities, there is specific criteria for the project area of the community-based clean mobility program. The community program project area is the geographic area where community residents live, services operate, and infrastructure is installed. Boundaries of the project area must be within at least one of the following geographies. A low-income community, defined as one in which at least 75% of the census tracts in the project area have median household incomes at or below 80% of the statewide median income, or with median household incomes at or below the threshold designated as low income by the Department of Housing and Community Development's list of state income limits. A disadvantaged community, defined as one in which at least 75% of the census tracts are identified as among the most disadvantaged 25% in the state, according to the California Environmental Protection Agency, and based on the most recent California Communities Environmental Health Screening Tool, also known as CalEnviroScreen. Tribal lands, including any property owned by a Native American tribal authority, regardless of federal recognition, within a designated low-income or disadvantaged community, or a community in which at least 75% of public school students in the project area are eligible to receive free or reduced price meals under the National School Lunch Program. Next slide, please. Continuing with the intent of the community-driven program, the community-based clean mobility program must be implemented by a community-based organization or Native American tribe. The community program may also be implemented by a public agency or nonprofit organization that has received a letter of support from a project-related community-based organization or local community group that represents community members that will be impacted by the project, or that has a service background related to the type of project to be implemented. Next slide, please. Now that we have described the eligibility requirements, we want to spend a moment describing the data collection requirements for manufacturers to earn the community program optional EJ credits. We would like to highlight that since the manufacturer will be earning the credits under the ZEV regulation, the application and reporting burden would land on the manufacturer and not the community program implementer. CARB staff is proposing that the manufacturer must at a minimum provide vehicle-specific data, such as the vehicle VIN, the vehicle MSRP, and the vehicle purchase agreement. The manufacturer should also provide program-specific information, such as the program description, the specific objectives of the program, the project location or area, and contact information for the community-based program implementer. Additionally, the manufacturer would need to submit an attestation from a community program implementer. The attestation shall confirm the % discount applied off MSRP and that the community-based clean mobility program meets the eligibility requirements as outlined. CARB staff is seeking public feedback on what other data elements we should collect to appropriately track outcomes of this proposed optional credit. Next slide, please. I will now turn it over to Krista Ely to discuss the other optional environmental justice credit category for used ZEVs.
Thank you, Chang. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Krista Ely, and today I will be presenting the optional EJ credit category for used ZEVs. Next slide, please. First, I will talk about why we think used zero-emission vehicles are important and how they may be even more important for our underserved community members. 70% of consumers purchased used cars in 2019, according to Consumer Reports and Edmunds. In addition, CARB staff have analyzed data from 2 programs that help make clean vehicles accessible and affordable for our low-income and disadvantaged communities. The Clean Cars for All program and the Clean Vehicle Assistance Program. The Clean Cars for All program helps lower income consumers get into cleaner technology vehicles by retiring their older, higher polluting cars and replacing them with a zero or near zero emission vehicles. The Clean Vehicle Assistance Program provides grants and affordable financing to help lower income consumers purchase or lease a new or used hybrid or electric vehicle. Through 2020, approximately 75% of Clean Cars for All grants have been awarded for used vehicles. And as shown in the graph, the percent of used vehicles in the program is higher than the average in the San Joaquin Valley at 97%. We also found in analyzing data from the Clean Vehicle Assistance Program, used vehicles also tend to be purchased at higher rates by our lowest income consumers. In addition, the savings vary among models, but on average, used EVs cost 43 to 72% less than new ones, according to Edmunds. With more reliable and durable used ZEVs on the market post-2025, due to additional measures we are proposing under this rulemaking, used ZEVs may help increase access and exposure to the technology. Used ZEVs are also often more affordable, both in terms of upfront acquisition costs and ongoing registration and insurance costs. Next slide, please. Keeping the value of used ZEVs in mind, CARB staff further investigated how manufacturers may be able to provide a larger inventory of used ZEVs to be available for our programs. We also want to ensure that the credit provision has the potential to be implemented by vehicle manufacturers. This led us to consider actions related to leased vehicles that are owned by a leasing company, which is often a financing arm of the automaker. The resorting of used plug-in electric vehicles across states often results from the activity of dealerships who purchase the used electric vehicles from previous owners or reclaim ownership after the end of a lease. Rather than selling the car on their own used car lot, dealers will often sell the car to another dealer via an auction clearinghouse. In CARB's Advanced Clean Cars midterm review, staff noted that the plug-in electric vehicles originating in California, a greater share was transferred to other states when compared to gasoline cars, suggesting there may be a higher demand for, or a limited supply of, used plug-in vehicles in these states, and that electric vehicles may be migrating out of the state at faster rates than conventional cars. Likewise, for electric vehicles originating in other ZEV states, historically a sizable share was transferred to other states and at a greater rate than gasoline-only vehicles are transferred. The potential impact of used ZEVs coming off lease can be significant. As shown here, according to Statista, Experian, and Car and Driver, nationwide about 1 in 4 new vehicles are leased and not purchased. In California, that percent of all leased vehicles tends to be slightly higher than the average at about 32%. Additionally, CARB staff analyzed survey data from the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project, or CVRP. CVRP promotes clean vehicle adoption in California by offering rebates of up to $7,000 for the purchase or lease of new eligible zero-emission vehicles, including electric, plug-in hybrid, electric, and fuel cell vehicles. CVRP survey statistics show approximately 70% of battery EVs have been leased and not purchased. This is consistent with other findings that vehicle leasing tends to be higher for new technologies. While CARB staff believe the percent of leased ZEVs may decrease over time, these leased vehicles can provide great value in the used vehicle market. Next slide, please. With this in mind, CARB staff is proposing that manufacturers can earn environmental justice for used ZEVs coming off lease. The intent of this proposal is to increase access to more affordable used ZEVs for consumers in California. Additionally, this may provide a larger inventory of used ZEVs available for our programs, such as the Clean Cars for All and the Clean Vehicle Assistance Program. The concept of our proposal is that a leased ZEV originally offered at or below 40,000 MSRP may receive extra credit the next year it is registered for operation, either purchased or leased, in California beyond its first 3 years of service as a leased vehicle. Next slide, please. First, I would like to note, as with the community program EJ credit, that since this proposal provides manufacturers with EJ credits for the ZEV regulation, the only eligible motor vehicles would be passenger cars and trucks. Additionally, staff is proposing that only battery electric vehicles and fuel cell vehicles would be eligible for the used ZEV EJ credit. These ZEVs would also need to meet all the minimum requirements under the ZEV regulation for earning ZEV credits. Another aspect of the vehicle eligibility for this EJ credit is that these credits would only be for model year 2026 through 2028 that were originally leased for a 36-month term. Leased vehicles that are used in a community-based clean mobility program do not earn used ZEV EJ credit for a 4th year of service because leased vehicles under that program require a minimum 4-year lease term. The original leased ZEV must also have an MSRP value equal to or lower than 40,000 when it is new. This ensures that we are incentivizing more affordable ZEVs in the used market and better capturing the intent to increase access to more affordable ZEVs. Staff's proposal is that the MSRP cap be determined by the minimum base model price. If we were to look at zero-emission vehicles today, you can see in this table that most battery electric vehicles would be eligible. Vehicles excluded would largely be more luxury class vehicles such as BMW, Jaguar, Mercedes-Benz, and the Tesla Model S and X. Next slide, please. So how much credit could be earned for these used ZEVs? CARB staff is proposing that each model year 2026 through 2028 battery electric vehicle or fuel cell vehicle can earn a one-time 0.10 EJ credit if the ZEV remains in the state for a full year after the end of the lease. The 0.10 credit would not be earned for each year the vehicle stays in service, only for the 1 year following the lease return. This EJ credit category would follow the same phase out in 2031 as the other optional EJ credits. As such, credits can only be generated for model year 2026 through 2028 vehicles, which would get credit in model years 2029 through 2031. CARB staff is proposing the earliest model year a vehicle can be eligible for this credit is model year 2026. This is important because starting in 2026, model year and beyond, ZEVs will need to meet more stringent ZEB assurance requirements and technical requirements, which means greater certainty of better used ZEVs. So to give an example, a model year 2026 BEV is leased for 3 years and is returned in model year 2028. The BEV is then released or sold to a consumer in California that keeps the vehicle in the state for another year. The manufacturer then earns a 0.10 EJ credit for model year 2029. Next slide, please. We have now explained both the community program and used ZEV categories for optional EJ credits. Recall that these EJ credits are in addition to the base ZEV or PHEV credit earned for these vehicles and can be used to fulfill up to a 5% of a manufacturer's credit obligation through the 2031 model year. These credits are optional. To summarize, the community program EJ credit is available for new plug-in hybrids and zero-emission vehicles that are offered at a discount and placed in service in a community-based clean mobility program. Each PHEV earns 0.4 EJ credits. Each ZEV earns 0.5 EJ credits. These credits can be earned in model years 2026 through 2031. The EJ credit for used ZEVs is only applicable for leased ZEVs, not PHEVs. Each ZEV that is placed in service in California for a full year after lease return can earn 0.10 EJ credits. Because of the lease period, 36 months, these EJ credits will be generated in model years 2029 through 2030. Next slide, please. As you may have heard during our last workshop in May, staff's goal is to develop a stringency that would achieve 100% of new ZEV sales by 2035. However, staff believes that there's still use for a credit-based regulation, allowing for appropriate banking, trading, and fulfillment of deficits can appropriately afford manufacturers the flexibility needed to fully transition to electrification and handle year-to-year fluctuations and redesigns. While proposals under ACC II are aimed at moving from a highly flexible ZEV regulation to a regulation that is meant to provide more assurance around increasing ZEV volumes to achieve the ultimate goal of 100% sales, staff feel that optional EJ credits are necessary to help ensure we achieve our environmental justice goals. As our transportation system transitions to zero emission, we want to help ensure that everyone can access quality transportation, including new and used electric cars. In this graph, we're showing how the new proposed EJ credits may impact the percent of new ZEV and PHEV sales. The solid blue line was the original stringency proposal we presented at the May workshop. The original proposal started at 26% of new ZEVs and plug-in hybrids in model year 2026, ramping up to 76% by 2031 and reaching 100% in 2035. With the new optional EJ credits as proposed today, if manufacturers maximize the 5% cap on these EJ credits, the resulting new ZEV and PHEV sales are shown by the red dashed line. Manufacturers would instead need to deliver for sale 24% ZEV and PHEVs as a proportion of new vehicle sales in 2026 and would ramp up to 72% in 2031. And after 2031, the optional EJ credits expire and the curves are identical from 2032 through 2035. Next slide, please. During our last workshop in May, we asked stakeholders how we can meaningfully ensure equitable outcomes from the ZEV regulation and how we can help increase accessibility to ZEV technology. Today, you've heard a couple of concepts staff are proposing to help increase affordable access to ZEVs for our underserved communities. Keep in mind that working to address environmental justice concerns within the ZEV regulation is just one of many measures we are collectively pursuing across CARB to prioritize the needs of historically underserved communities in California. We would like to hear what your thoughts are on the concepts presented today. Do you think the concepts for optional EJ credit help achieve the goal of increasing affordable access to ZEVs for our underserved communities? How can we best focus the use ZEV EJ credit option to ensure we provide more direct benefits to our underserved communities? Should we provide additional credit or perhaps only provide EJ credit for a used ZEV that is placed in a community mobility or low income program, such as Clean Cars for All? Do you think the concepts for EJ credit are best suited as a regulatory measure? What other ideas for EJ credit should we consider? And in what ways do you think automakers can best help increase access to electric cars, especially for our priority communities? Please feel free to take your time and provide your thoughts on the optional EJ credit concepts or on any of the questions that are listed on the slide and I just went over. And you can provide those comments in our online workshop comment form. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Kilodakis to moderate our Q&A break for questions on the topics we have just presented so far. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Krista. Yeah, so right now we'd like to take questions. We have about 15 minutes to take your questions. Again, please use your the Q&A box to type in a question, and I will be also asking folks on the phone to taking questions from folks on the phone who don't have access to the video, the Zoom. So before I do that, while people type in questions, I'm going to launch a quick poll here. So poll number 1 is, thinking of the most recent car you purchased or leased, was this vehicle acquired as a new or used car? So if folks would just let us know they got a new or used car for their last vehicle purchase. Looks like new is a little bit ahead in the running. Then, okay, it looks like things have kind of slowing down. I will end this poll and show that of the folks that answered the question, we had good participation, 59%. We had 61% said they bought a new car, 36% said they bought a used car, and then we have 3% that have not. Oh, did I not share the results? Sorry about that. So new car, 61%, used car, 36%, and then do not own or have a car, 3%. Thanks for answering that question. I'm going to do one more quick poll while people type in any questions that they have at this time. Let's see here. Clearly, let's see. Stop sharing. Here we go. Question number 2. If you plan to acquire a new zero-emission vehicle, would you more likely lease it or purchase it? So the answers are coming in. It's like purchasing might be coming out a little bit ahead. And give it a few more seconds, let people answer. Great, I will close this down. Everyone's answering pretty quickly, so thank you. I will share the results. It looks like 51% said they would purchase, 33% lease, and then 15% said they don't know. So thanks for answering the polls. And with that, I will now dive into the question answer time. What I'd like to do is give the people on the phone a chance to ask a question. So if you're on the phone, please hit *9 to raise your hand. And then when I see a hand raised by someone on the phone, I will ask you to unmute, which you would push *6 to unmute. So I'll just give folks a second to do that process. And if you do still want to, if you're on the phone, you want to ask a question, please just, *9 to raise your hand, and we can unmute you. So until then, I'm going to go to the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many questions as possible in the next 15 minutes. So I'm going to just start kind of from the first question asked down, and some of the questions have been answered via kind of the type feature from staff. Otherwise, I'll read the question. So after reviewing your deck, it seems that the ARB, or Air Resources Board, is overlooking battery swapping as a key trend in the global industry. So I might not read the whole question. I think everyone can see the question. So I'm going to ask one of our staff if they can answer that question live. Whoever wants to unmute yourself, and I don't know if Joshua or Marissa. Thanks, Marissa.
Yeah, I think this is a relevant comment, and we're happy to chat more with folks about how battery swapping might help EJ communities in particular. I'm not sure if there's an ask for us to provide some sort of crediting mechanism or otherwise, but I appreciate the comments here.
Thanks. I'll go to the next question here. Curious why used plug-in hybrid electric vehicles are not eligible for the used ZEV EJ credit program. Many financially vulnerable communities welcome the assurance that a dual fuel vehicle solution gives them.
And I'll just jump in, Lisa. I think that this is like exactly the type of feedback that we want to hear, right? We're trying to gather thoughts on sort of if these provisions are helpful for our communities, and if perhaps plug-in hybrids should be included in the ZEV program. So happy to, I think that if folks feel like that's a value to the communities and it helps meet their mobility needs, we definitely do not want to overlook that. So appreciate the feedback here on the plug-in hybrids in particular for the ZEV portion.
Thanks, Marissa. Now we have from Steve Douglas. How would car share programs receive EJ credits? Could automakers operate a car share program? Have you considered EJ credits for car share programs that include used vehicles? Also, have you considered starting the EJ credit program now rather than waiting until 2026?
Yes, I'll try and take those questions one at a time. So I think we walked through, so the car share programs themselves would not be receiving the credit. It would be the manufacturer that is providing the vehicle at a discount that is going to the car share program. So hopefully that's clear through the presentation. The automakers, as we outlined, would not be the ones perhaps operating the car share program unless that was the desire of the community. It should really be a community-driven process to determine what the car share program looks like. And I think we laid that out in the sort of EO approval process of who would be operating the car share program and the eligibility requirements for that. The current programs that we have for both clean mobility options and sustainable transportation equity projects do allow used vehicles in their car share programs. The EJ credits that we have set out are for new vehicles that are offered at a discount. Those would be, eligible for additional EJ credits. We're open to considering used vehicles as well, but would want to hear feedback on if there's a percent discount of the used vehicles that perhaps that would be relevant, and how we might be able to track implementation of that for those vehicles landing in the car share programs. And then the last question, starting the program rather than waiting to 2026, I think that has been a consideration and something that we could continue thinking about. One thing that I think staff noted was that they really felt as though the vehicles that are coming out, model year 2026 and later, because of all of the additional measures that we have for minimum technical requirements and ZEB assurances, those are the vehicles that we really want to incentivize in these programs to provide that additional assurance. So that's why it would kind of start with those model year vehicles, but definitely open to more conversation around that particular timeframe.
Thanks, Marissa. So we have the next comment from Sasan Sadat. He says, this is a key flaw. Staff is only willing to award EJ credits at the expense of overall climate outcomes. That is not equity. That is shielding automakers from any additional stringency and pitting climate against EJ outcomes. Why wouldn't California increase the stringency of the rule overall if it is proposing to allow manufacturers yet more flexibility?
Yeah, and I think we appreciate the comment here as well on the stringency. So right now, I think as folks noted, the proposal is that the EJ credits kind of would fall within the existing proposal for the credit and sales requirements that we've laid out already. And we will be talking more about the stringency requirement at our next workshop in the fall of this year. And any modifications that we may need to make to the stringency with additional provisions that we're proposing.
Thanks, Marissa. I have here from Tom Miller. Will California ARB, Air Resources Board, adopt zero-emission vehicle purchase requirements for light-duty vehicle fleets and do so alongside the development of updated manufacturers of sales requirements in the Advanced Clean Cars 2 rule?
Hi, Lisa. I can take that question.
Thanks.
We have moved forward as an air board and staff on one key policy action that addresses one type of fleet. In May, our board adopted the Clean Mile Standard, which affects ride-hailing companies like Uber and Lyft and any other companies like them in California. There's an electrification requirement out to 2030. that affects the drivers and the vehicles that they will use as they're on the platforms for Uber and Lyft. A requirement on Uber and Lyft to encourage those drivers to get those vehicles, get electric vehicles. We currently do not have plans to do other kinds of fleet requirements, which would be more traditional fleets like rental fleets or corporate fleets. So we don't currently have plans to do that in the passenger vehicle sector.
Thanks, Joshua. Yeah, let's see, I was trying to go first come, first who did the questions first, but it looks like they're rated on other ways. Let's see. Let's just go to the top then. Was an economic analysis performed to determine whether the EJ credit amount would be enough to offset the premium that OEMs can fetch when shipping their off-lease EVs to states where used EV prices are more competitive?
Lisa, happy to
Thanks.
jump in here as well. I think right now these are some proposed concepts that staff would like additional feedback on while we do additional analyses. I think the value of used EVs and additional rebates that are offered in other states is something to certainly consider, and how we think about incentivizing the manufacturers to participate in this provision, because we do want to ensure in the end that the manufacturers are able to participate and that we sort of realize the outcomes that we're intending to have. And so I think, one open question that we had, I think as Krista noted here, is, rather than, is there any additional way that folks think that we can provide more direct benefits through this used ZEV EJ credit option, perhaps that those vehicles need to be placed in a particular program or going to particular community members, and that would ensure that we're having more direct benefits through that mechanism.
Thanks, Marissa. So I'm just going to go down because it looks like it's based on popularity of the question. So why is CARB not willing to consider strengthening mandates in line with the other countries? So Marissa, that question from Sasan. In France, the used EV market is blossoming. The obvious strategy for greater low-cost ZEVs seems to be increasing early stringency like other leading nations.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment. If folks feel like a way for us to ensure greater equity within the regulation is to have higher stringency early on, I think that's some valuable feedback for us to hear. That CARB staff have, at least if folks were able to catch our last workshop in May, proposed a stringency that they thought that matched sort of where we were at in California, and thought that they had a pretty strong proposal. But there, like I said, is opportunity to have further conversation around that as we lead into our fall workshop, and thinking more about that stringency requirement. I think as Krista showed, the EJ optional credits, I think only modify that sales requirement by a couple % year by year. And we do want to ensure that we get to the 100% target in 2035. So there is a phase out of the program in 2031.
Thanks. How about, let's see, the next question on here is lack of access to charging at home is probably the greatest inhibitor to EV ownership, new or used. Can EJ credits be utilized in some way to accelerate infrastructure in disadvantaged communities with apartments and condos?
Yeah, Guy, I think that's a great comment, and we definitely are wanting to take in all ideas here on other things that folks feel would be valuable for EJ crediting, and definitely thinking about infrastructure is not off the table, is something that we've been thinking about, a way that may be implemented, and how the manufacturers in particular may be able to help with that particular concern for our communities. So happy to have more conversations with you and others around what that may look like, and things that we may be able to consider as an additional option within this sort of EJ crediting category.
Thanks, Marissa. We have a couple, like maybe one more minute here to get through what we can. And then again, if you don't get your question answered today, please send an email to our Clean Cars email address at arb.ca.gov. And we're happy to follow up with you and answer your questions. So the next question, why is this also in the future? Why can't you start with the cars produced in 2022?
Yeah, I think we had a similar comment about perhaps starting before 2026. So that's definitely something we can investigate further if that's the route that folks feel like, we get a lot of feedback on in that particular direction. I think I noted that one reason I think that the team felt as though we should start in 2026 was because of additional assurances that we are proposing that you'll hear about a little bit later for those model year vehicles and beyond. And in general, this rulemaking is, post 2025. So we have our current Advanced Clean Cars program that runs through, ramping stringency through 2025. And so this is a future looking regulation. I know it's a little bit hard to think about 5 years from now, but for post 2025 vehicles.
Thanks, Marissa. So I think that takes us to the 15-minute mark for our open Q&A. So from there, I think we'll turn it over to Anna, right? The next section.
Yeah, I think it is me now. Good evening, everybody. I've never got to say that before in a public workshop. So here's to new things. My name is Anna Wong, and I'll be walking us through the next couple sets of slides. But I'm going to start with the new minimum requirements for ZEV credit. We can go to the next slide, Lisa. Okay, so just to recall where we left off. So at the May workshop earlier this year, we posed the question of what should qualify a pure ZEV. And when I say pure ZEV, I mean a battery electric vehicle or a fuel cell electric vehicle to be counted towards a manufacturer's ZEV requirement. And this is of great interest to us as we have proposed to change from a variable attribute-based credit system, meaning credits for vehicles were mainly based on the vehicle's electric range, to a one-for-one credit system, meaning a vehicle produced would earn 1 credit. Just to review where we're at today with the current requirements, battery electric vehicles and fuel cell vehicles must meet certain criteria to count toward an OEM ZEV obligation. You can see those listed on this table under the current column, and I'll just run through them. We require at minimum a 50-mile test range, a level 2 charger that meets a certain standard called the J1772 standard, and an onboard charger that's at least 3.3 kilowatts, which determines how quickly your vehicle can charge. And then neighborhood electric vehicles, which I think you could think of them as like electric golf carts in many communities. These are low speed, short range electric vehicles, and they meet a separate set of requirements and only count at this point towards a very small portion of manufacturers' requirements if they so choose them, and not very many manufacturers are producing them. Since May, we have received feedback on the question of new minimum qualifications for pure ZEVs and have spent time developing a proposal. And as to not leave any of you hanging, you can see the proposal for 2026 and beyond listed in the table, but I want to walk you through how we arrived at these conclusions. Also, if you're interested in the proposed minimum requirements for plug-in hybrids, I'll point you towards those May workshop slides where we presented those requirements for the plug-in hybrids. So again, this is just for battery electric vehicles and for fuel cell vehicles. Okay, next slide, Lisa. We believe that updating minimum requirements sends the right policy sign for various reasons. Get away comments from stakeholders wanting to stick with the current way others wanting to raise those minimums and even add more categories that are still in development, all while balancing comments received on cost assumptions, also proposed at the May workshop. And all of these things must be considered at the same time, along with our never before implemented ZEB assurance measures and the effect those would have on a ZEV being able to meet those minimum requirements. Also, since May, we have held a community listening session and talked more with groups interested in how to make the regulation more equitable and consider drivers with differing needs, living situations, and income levels. So we must recognize that the technology is rapidly developing, battery costs are coming down, charging behavior is being studied and changing as the market grows. We believe the purpose of these minimums is to protect the lowest cost option. Assume that this would be an entry point for many low income individuals into the new car market. And what at minimum that vehicle would need to be equipped with to meet the needs of that driver and still qualify as a replacement gasoline vehicle. Next slide, Lisa. Okay, so following that logic, staff believes that a 150-mile real-world range vehicle, which translates into about a 200-mile range on our two-cycle test. So believes that a 150-mile real-world range vehicle that meets staff's proposed durability standard would still have more than 100-mile range after 15 years of use. This seems to be the very lowest limit of what we can expect drivers to accept, as we have studied data coming out of our Clean Cars for All program and other studies of used ZEVs. Assuming an average vehicle travels about 40 miles a day in California, that person can still do their daily miles and recharge their vehicle about every other day, which is probably a pretty good assumption for apartment dwellers who may have to rely on fast charging. When we started thinking about the appropriate onboard charger size for this minimum vehicle, we wanted to make sure that someone who had access to level 2 charging, even through a 240 outlet in their garage, would be able to recharge their vehicle overnight. And assuming that home had a standard 30 amp dryer outlet, the onboard charger for a 150-mile range battery electric vehicle would need to be 5.76 kilowatts. Again, this is really not meant to bring down all vehicles to a new average, but hold the minimum vehicle that qualifies for credit in the ZEB regulation to standards that are acceptable for most drivers in California to able to actually replace their gasoline vehicle. Next slide, Lisa. I think many would go to the logical conclusion that if we set the minimum so low, that's where the OEMs will build vehicles to save costs. But I'm not actually sure that that behavior is actually occurring. Again, just to remind you, right now the minimum range for a vehicle is 50 miles test range, which means close to about 35 miles in the real world. But as you can see, there are many vehicles that are far surpassing CARB's minimum requirements. And we have every reason to believe that this will continue to occur because the market is demanding longer range vehicles. Next slide, Lisa. Okay, so considering all these things, we are proposing modest technical minimums for ZEVs. This includes a 200-mile two-cycle test range for battery electric vehicles, and for fuel cell vehicles, which is equivalent to 150 miles label range. Also for battery electric vehicles, DC fast charging capability is not currently required. However, there is no vehicle currently announced that will not be DC fast charge capable. But as a reminder, there have actually been some lower trim levels of battery electric vehicles offered in the past that have not been capable of fast charging, and we don't want to see that happening. For level 2, I totally lost my train of thought here. So we believe that this minimum is essential as battery sizes grow to help to meet ranges that the market demands. And as we consider those drivers who are in apartment complexes and other multi-unit dwellings who may be more reliant upon fast charging. For level 2, which we believe will still make up the bulk of charging, increasing the onboard charger size to 5.76 kilowatts will sufficiently meet the needs of battery electric vehicles with a 150-mile range. And as with range, we expect onboard chargers will continue to be much larger to provide even faster at-home charging experiences. Additionally, at minimum, BEVs will be required to be equipped with a convenience cord capable of both level 1 and level 2 charging. We actually already see this as a standard offered with BEVs on the market. However, as we think about the lowest cost entry point, it's essential that this convenience cord be included going forward. Lastly, we're proposing removing neighborhood electric vehicles from counting towards manufacturer's compliance after 2026 model year. Currently, neighborhood electric vehicles play a very insignificant role in manufacturer's compliance and are heavily capped in the current program. Though these vehicles can certainly provide benefits in limited applications, they're far from being a replacement to a full function gasoline vehicle. So this actually concludes this part of the presentation. And just as a reminder, we're going to stop for questions about all of these things that I've just talked about later on in the presentation, after we go through some other nuts and bolts that we need to go through. So I'm going to move on, Lisa, to the next slide. So I'm going to do a short recap of the Advanced Clean Cars proposal, including all those things that have been kind of presented in the last public workshop. Okay, Lisa, let's go to those CEQA slides. Okay, so CARB is preparing a programmatic level environmental analysis, or EA, as for short, as if that's not the most shortest abbreviation, assessing the potential for adverse and beneficial environmental impacts associated with the proposed Advanced Clean Cars II program. The EA, or environmental analysis again, the EA is prepared according to the requirements of our certified regulatory program under the California Environmental Quality Act, which we call CEQA for short. The EA will be based on the anticipated reasonably foreseeable actions undertaken by entities in response to the proposed amendments, which could have the potential to cause indirect physical changes to the environment. CARB is using the CEQA environmental checklist, and again, when I say CEQA, it means California Environmental Quality Act, as a framework, and this will be included when we release all of our documents, as a framework for assessing the potential for significant impacts resulting from reasonably foreseeable actions. The checklist includes criteria related to resource areas such as aesthetics, agriculture and forest resources, biological resources, cultural resources, geological and soil resources, and hazards and hazardous materials, among others. The environmental analysis, or EA, will be included as an appendix to the staff report. Okay, next slide. So let's go over what the environmental analysis will include. A description of the reasonably foreseeable actions that appear most likely to occur as a result of implementing the proposed amendments, the potential adverse impacts and feasible mitigation measures, and alternatives analysis. Staff welcomes public input on the appropriate scope and content of the EA as it's being developed, including the reasonably foreseeable actions that may occur in response to the proposal, the potential significant adverse impacts, potential feasible mitigation measures, and feasible alternatives to the proposal that could reduce or eliminate any significant adverse impacts. The draft EA will be released for a 45-day public comment period along with the staff report in 2022. To that end, I'm going to provide a high-level overview of staff's ZEV proposal. Lisa, do you want to go to the next slide? Okay, and then let's go to the next one. Great, thank you. Okay, so Marissa did such a great job of doing this earlier, so I'm going to try to make this brief. So overall, the next iteration of the ZEV regulation will focus on 2026 and subsequent model years. The goal of the proposed amendments will be to increase the number of ZEVs delivered in California, with the end goal of 100% sales of ZEVs and plug-in hybrids by 2035 model year. And in order to do this, we propose to restructure the regulation to a one-for-one credit structure, meaning a ZEV meeting the minimum qualifications I just talked about is going to be given 1 credit. In addition to this shift in crediting, staff is proposing to impose a 5-year credit life for 2026 and subsequent model year credits. And this will ensure the volumes grow towards the 100% target and that credits are used to manage slight year-to-year fluctuations as they were originally intended. Staff is also proposing limits on credits earned before 2026 or 2026 model year, as earlier banked credits could stifle OEMs from making real progress towards the goal. Not only will pre-2026 model year credits be converted to better fit within the new credit structure, but all converted pre-2026 credits will expire by the end of 2030 model year. And to ensure manufacturers stay on track to being able to meet CARB's 100% goal, there's a cap placed on the number of credits that a manufacturer can use within a year to satisfy their requirement. So that's a 15% cap that we're placing on those historical credits. As you heard earlier today, we're proposing to raise the minimum requirements for ZEVs. And at our May workshop, we actually proposed new minimum standards for plug-in hybrids, which I also mentioned. So for plug-in hybrids, the new minimum label all electric range would need to be at least 50 miles. And the engine would need to remain off while the battery is depleting over a very aggressive test cycle called the USO6. These new minimum requirements would be in addition to those currently in place for plug-in hybrids, meaning they would have to be LEV 30 and have zero evaporative emissions, carry a 15-year, 150,000-mile warranty on emission-related parts, and a 10-year, 150,000-mile warranty on the vehicle's traction battery. Additionally, to balance the emission reductions necessary from light-duty vehicles with the benefits plug-in hybrids offer to a growing ZEV market, staff is proposing a cap where plug-in hybrids can only be used to meet up to 20% of a manufacturer's requirements in any given year. And I just want to mention that we have a recorded presentation of all of these things on our May workshop up on our website and is available to everyone if you want to go through each of these in detail and hear me drone on for another hour about this regulation. Okay, let's go on to the ZEB Assurance Measures. So in addition to restructuring of the ZEV regulation, staff is proposing a host of ZEB Assurance Measures, which you've heard about a lot during this. So I'm going to run through these pretty quickly. Staff is proposing that battery electric vehicle test groups must be designed to maintain 80% of certified range for 15 years or 150,000 miles, whichever occurs first. And fuel cell vehicle test groups must be designed to maintain at least 90% of fuel cell system output after 4,000 hours of operation. As for individual vehicles, staff is proposing a bifurcated approach to minimum warranties for ZEVs. So we're proposing that that manufacturers provide at minimum a powertrain warranty of 3 years or 3 years, 50,000 miles, or 7 years, 70,000 miles for high priced parts, which matches very well with our gasoline warranties that we require at minimum. But this would exclude the battery. So for traction batteries and battery electric vehicles, staff proposes the same warranty length as for plug-in hybrids, which is 10 years or 150,000 miles. And that is all going to be now linked to the battery's state of health metric, which is also proposed to be standardized. To ensure the inclusion of the independent repair industry into this huge transformation of ZEVs, staff is proposing to require the same access and disclosure of repair information for ZEVs that's required for gasoline vehicles. For ZEVs, this information will be propulsion-related component repairs. CARB staff have also been proposed that manufacturers report more information through its OBD port on the vehicle. In addition to those data parameters, manufacturers will be required to calculate state of health of the battery and make this information readable to drivers without a tool. The purpose of this metric is to disclose to the driver or to the technician the actual battery state of health over the life of the vehicle. Furthermore, as California works to expand its fast charging infrastructure, we're trying to explore ways that plug-in electric vehicles can take advantage of the growing network. And as such, we're proposing under this rulemaking to standardize the DC fast charging inlet on vehicles. Right now, there's 2 different standards, and so we've chosen the SAE Combined Charging System, or CCS 1 standard. And like our previously adopted level 2 inlet standard, manufacturers may comply with this requirement by providing an adapter. Lastly, staff is proposing to increase recyclability of batteries through a labeling requirement. Staff are also looking at actions that we can take in partnership with other agencies to maximize rebuilding, repurposing, and ultimately recycling batteries to ensure maximum sustainability of the battery. When put together, these changes intend to hold manufacturers to appropriate and well-defined standards and to make zero-emission vehicles more attractive to mainstream consumers, all of which are needed to reach a broader market share. Again, if you're interested in more of these proposals and all the details behind them, I would point you actually to our first workshop way back in September. And then we followed that up with more details in our May workshop. So September and then May, you can listen to the recordings on these. With that, I can be done talking, and I can turn it over to Marco Yeftik, who's going to recap our LEV proposals today.
Hello, everyone. I'm Marco Yeftik. I'm staff in the Sustainable Transportation and Communities Division, and I will now give a recap of the LEV criteria emission proposals that were presented at our previous workshops. This includes changes to the light and medium duty exhaust emission regulations, as well as changes to the evaporative emission rules. So starting first with the light duty exhaust emission changes, our first proposal is to make changes to the NMOG plus NOx fleet average requirements. Under current rules, ZEVs are included in the fleet average. But going forward, this presents a challenge, since the fleet average remains flat beyond 2025, and the expected increase in ZEV market share opens the door for non-ZEVs to become dirtier. Therefore, staff is proposing to take ZEVs out of the fleet average and to transition to a standard of 30 milligrams per mile for the non-ZEV fleet. To help with this transition, staff is considering a proposal that will add new certification bins in between the existing bins, such as LEV 25 and LEV 40. Furthermore, to lower the cap on the dirtiest emission levels, staff is proposing to eliminate the dirtiest bins, starting with the LEV 160 bin and followed by the ULEV 125 bin. And finally, to encourage certification at levels cleaner than our currently lowest bin, we are considering adding bins like SULEV 10 and SULEV 15. Our second proposal aims to reduce NMOG and NOx emissions from aggressive driving. Under current rules, most automakers certify aggressive driving emissions using a composite value that is derived by averaging aggressive driving with less aggressive cycles. Staff's analysis found that the composite average allowed for poor emission control during aggressive driving for a small portion of the fleet. Furthermore, that a large majority could already meet much tighter standards in the aggressive USO6 drive cycle. Therefore, CARB is planning to eliminate the composite average option and to require that all vehicles certify aggressive driving emissions using a standalone standard for the USO6 cycle that will be equivalent to the less aggressive FTP cycle. Continuing with light duty on the next slide, CARB is also considering changes to the particulate matter standards for aggressive driving. The current PM standard for the aggressive USO 6 cycle is 6 milligrams per mile. Staff's analysis of vehicle test and certification data indicated that about 3/4 of current vehicles would be able to meet a tighter PM standard of 3 milligrams per mile. So to help ensure that all future vehicles can keep PM emissions low across a broad spectrum of driving conditions, staff plans to recommend a phase-in to a lower USO 6 PM standard of 3 milligrams per mile. Next, we have several proposals that aim to reduce cold start emissions. First, staff is planning to implement new rules to regulate cold start emissions for all soak durations. Current rules only regulate cold start emissions that follow soaks where the vehicle was turned off for 12 hours or longer. But staff testing showed that intermediate soaks in the region of 30 minutes to 4 hours could lead to increased emissions if the vehicles are not properly calibrated. To protect against these increased emissions, staff is planning to propose that the FTP emission standards must be met for any soak of 3 hours or longer, and furthermore, require linear emission improvements for soaks between 10 minutes to 3 hours. Another cold start emission concern that CARB is seeking to address involves an initial drive away that occurs before the 20-second initial idle prescribed by the FTP certification test. This is a concern since real-world data indicates that many in-use trips begin with a drive away before 20 seconds of idle. And vehicle testing revealed that this can cause emissions to be more than 2 times higher than certification tests. As a result, staff plans to add new standards for earlier driveaways that occur in the range of 5 to 10 seconds, and to set the standard based on the best performing test vehicles. There are also cold start emission concerns that are unique to plug-in hybrids. PHEVs can begin a trip driving fully electric, but if the driver suddenly demands high power, the combustion engine can turn on and there can be a big spike in emissions. To reduce the emission impacts of these high power cold starts, a new standard for a cold start USO 6 charge depleting emission test is being developed. Test data indicates that a standard of around 100 milligrams per mile for a ZEV 30 plug-in hybrid would be appropriate as a cold bag standard. Furthermore, PHEVs that can drive the USO 6 cycle fully electric without using the combustion engine would be exempt from this requirement. Now let's move on to the next slide and take a look at our planned changes for medium-duty vehicles. To ensure good emission control in areas of engine operation outside what is covered by the current chassis test cycles, staff plans to propose an in-use standard that uses the portable emission measurement system and the 3-bin moving average window method that was newly adopted for heavy-duty engines. This new requirement would apply to both diesel and gasoline chassis certified MDVs. Next, staff is considering changes to aggressive driving standards for MDVs. Under current rules, MDVs certify aggressive driving emissions using a weighted average that includes less aggressive drive cycles. Like with light duty, CARB testing found that the composite average standard did not ensure good emission control for aggressive driving on some vehicles. To better control aggressive driving emissions, staff is proposing to adopt new standalone standards for USO 6 and LA 92 test cycles. Lastly, staff is also looking at making changes to the fleet average requirements for Class 2B and Class 3 medium-duty vehicles. These changes include possibly lowering the fleet average requirements for NMOG plus NOx, taking ZEVs out of the NMOG plus NOx fleet average, removing some of the higher emission certification bins, and potentially adding new lower emission bins. Now let's go to the next slide and recap our planned changes to the evaporative emission regulations. The first part of the proposal involves changes to the running loss emission standard, which is for evaporative emissions that occur while the vehicle is driven, primarily due to fuel vapors escaping the fuel system. Staff is proposing to tighten the current standard from 0.05 to 0.01 grams per mile. Most vehicles are already meeting this tighter limit, but there are some higher emitters. So the goal of this proposal is to clean up the dirtiest vehicles and make sure that good designs remain the norm. The second part of the proposal aims to ensure the vehicle's evaporative control system is properly sized to contain puff emissions from the fuel tank venting pressure. This proposal mostly affects the specially sealed gasoline tanks that are common on plug-in hybrids, as these systems have emission implications not seen in conventional vehicles. Staff's proposal will add a minimum canister size requirement that will provide emission protection without adding test burden. Now I will pass it to Tao for a recap of changes to AC refrigerant rules.
Thanks, Marco. Good evening. My name is Tao Zhan. I'm with CARB Research Division. I work on measures to further reduce GHG emissions from motor vehicle air conditioning, or AC, as part of ACC II rulemaking. So today, I'm going to briefly present the working concepts, and we expect to discuss the topic in more detail during our fall workshop. As part of the consideration, we're planning to limit the global warming potential value, or GWP value, at 150 for refrigerants used in new light-duty vehicle AC systems. The previous predominant automotive refrigerant, which is still in wide use in the in-use fleet, is HFC 134A or R134A. It has a very high GWP value of 1430. The light-duty vehicle industry is going through a transition from R134A to low GWP alternatives. And the leading alternative of choice is HFO 1234YF with a GWP value of 4. Other alternatives include CO2 and HFC 152A, both having GWP values below 150. Therefore, the GWP limit as considered here would ensure continued industry transition to low GWP refrigerants. This would also contribute to meeting the state's goal of reducing hydrofluorocarbon emissions below the 2013 levels by 40% by the year 2030. And this is mandated by a state law, SB 1383. It's also worth noting that the GWP limit of 150 aligns with the GWP limit stipulated in the European Union law, which is called the Mobile Air Conditioning Directive. And that law has been in effect for about a decade now. In addition, we're planning to continue to offer AC credits. So with this, it concludes the AC portion of today's presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Tao. So now this is Lisa Kilodakis again. We're gonna open it up for our Q&A, and I'm going to, we're gonna address the questions from the second section of the workshop today. So I'm gonna start with the comment. Well, first, let me really quickly look to see if anyone on the phone has any questions or comments. So if you're on the phone and you wanna raise your hand, please hit *9, and then we can unmute you with the *6. So please let us know if through the *9 if you have any questions on the phone. Well, I'll just keep an eye on that, and I'll move over to our Q&A box here. So the first question, there's a quick comment. Thank you, anonymous attendee. They say they like the idea of a dual level 1, level 2 capable convenience cord. My next question is from Mark Geller. It's, what is the rationale for requiring minimum 200-mile range, given that many cars' daily duty cycle is much lower, and lower battery capacity means lower cost? So I'm not sure if Marissa or Anna would like to jump on and answer that question.
Yeah, thanks for your question, Mark. Well, we can either go back to the slides and talk about that, but what I think that what your question is really saying is, why don't we do a lower minimum? And we definitely considered that, but as we thought through what the experience of some of the drivers in the programs that actually take advantage of the used ZEVs, like Clean Cars for All, and that incentivize folks to get into those vehicles, a lot of those drivers were really unsatisfied with vehicles less than 100 miles. And so we're trying to take our cues from that and make sure that the vehicles that are kind of going into any program like it into the future, that they would have a minimum of 100 miles at least later on in life, assuming that 200-mile range test range vehicle meets the durability standard over its life. So that was the reasoning that we came up with, but we're open to comment about how we could better suit those to meet everybody's needs.
Thanks, Anna. So the next question is, why not bidirectional CCS as a requirement to support B2G and B2H in 2026 and beyond? And not sure.
Well, Lisa, I can probably take that one.
Thank you. Mike McCarthy, I think.
Yes, sorry, Mike McCarthy. Yes, we're actually very interested in this, and we actually put some effort into looking at this as well. Our conclusion when we looked into this was we're just a little bit ahead of SAE and ISO committees in getting a standard together that we could latch onto and require in our regulation. So this is something that we're staying tuned on. We just think we're going to be a little bit premature with this rulemaking going to the board, in less than a year from now, and being able to have a standard that we can really latch onto and adopt as written. So, but I think this would be something that we will continue to watch, and it wouldn't surprise me if we would look back at a future year and include something like this. I just said our initial analysis, and we're just going to be a little bit too early to grab this in this rulemaking, given the state of the SAE and ISO folks working on that standardization.
Thanks, Mike. The next question is from an anonymous attendee. What is the purpose of the 2 cycles? It is very misleading to talk about 200 miles for cars that will not be able to make more than 150 miles in the real world. Also, adding different range than the EPA may confuse the consumers. I'm not sure, Anna.
Yeah, I'm okay with answering it unless and Mike, feel free to jump in. So we just have to use standardized tests in order to certify vehicles here in California. So they have to kind of go through test cycles that are common, that everyone can be held to the same standard. So when I say 2-cycle tests, there's a city cycle that kind of imitates what city driving would be like. and then a highway cycle, which requires the vehicle to travel at higher speeds. And those two test results for the range are averaged together. And that comes up with a longer typical than real world test range. And we just use that because it's standard across all vehicles. And when you translate that test range into a label range or closer to real world, it's about 70% of that value. So that's how we came up with that value. But if you were like me and love to read regulations, the regulation would likely say 200-mile meeting our two cycle tests. So over those 2 cycle tests. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, but to be clear, these are the exact same cycles and approach that EPA uses. They're the
That's
same
right.
test cycles, with the same methodology, and the same language. So we are aligned with EPA. We're not creating a new range. We're just moving. We didn't want to mislead people talking about a 200-mile test cycle range when it really works out to something that you would see in the big number on the label, and what's closer to real world is something like 150. That's why Anna talks in both the regs and EPR regs and our regs use the test cycles, but we wanted to make sure people had a more realistic view of what kind of range we're talking about.
Thanks, Anna and Mike. Next question is from Tim Lavery. On slides 36 and 40, I can go there in a second if we need to. There is a requirement for the convenience cord to be both 120 volt and 240 volt capable. Is the 240 volt plug going to be specified? NEMA 1430 or 1450 seems to be common. Number 2, what amp rating would be required? Just 12 amp for both 120 volt and 240 volt, or will it need to go higher for the 240 volts?
I can start on this one, and then Mike, you can chime in. I think it's a really good question, Tim. And I think that there are things that a lot of people are grappling with as far as which NEMA plug that we would be requiring. So I would encourage more conversations around this, because as we started looking into it, manufacturers just have offered different types of like level 2 plugs, basically. So we wanted to get more data in terms of what is the most common in a household, because at minimum we'd want that to require, but some manufacturers are even providing more than just one 240 plug. So it's a very honest answer, but I would appreciate folks with more data as far as what most of the housing stock has in California. That's the kind of data that we've been trying to track down so that we didn't require at minimum a plug that wouldn't be usable. But those are all really good questions.
Great, thanks, Anna. I'm going to try to get to some folks that haven't asked questions yet. Dave Tuttle says Tesla and Ford Mach-E already have a free level 1 and level 2 convenience cord in models being sold today. All the plug-in electric vehicles should have them far earlier than 2026. I guess maybe that's a comment. Thanks for that.
Yeah, just Lisa, let me just address that. I want to make sure that it's clear. We understand that battery electric vehicles are equipped with these today, and we really appreciate that and think that they should be included in the future. We were just thinking about a lower cost vehicle meeting those minimum standards, and what at minimum that vehicle would need to include. And think about the kind of consumer that would be buying that vehicle and not wanting to strand them without a convenience cord. So that was the thinking behind requiring that at minimum. But we do recognize that manufacturers right now are providing them with the vehicle, and we expect that to continue on into the future.
Great, thanks. So here, I think is really related to that earlier battery swap question from an anonymous attendee. Unlike Better Place, Ample uses an adapter to fit each OEM's battery form factor, so no standard form factors required. Looks like there's just some questions and maybe statements about battery swapping. For the battery swapping, can CARB support standard batteries to allow all OEMs and all low-income disadvantaged community members to participate? A great option can be AA batteries or older D batteries. I'm not sure if those were supposed to go together, maybe not, or maybe so. So, let me see. And then here's a question from Kevin Hamilton. Why not a 5-year, 60,000 mile powertrain warranty that would align with auto industry best practices? No, Anna.
Yeah. Thanks, Kevin, for that question. So I would just direct you to the recording of the May workshop because there was a lot of questions around this and warranty period. We're aligning with the minimum warranty that's required on emission-related parts for gasoline vehicles for those powertrain components. So it's just aligning with what is required for gasoline vehicles for now. And again, we have to think of these as minimum warranties and not standard warranties. We understand that manufacturers will offer warranties they believe appropriate and will help support their vehicles. So we hear you, and as we've considered these things, we've tried as much as possible to align where we can with what we're offering for gasoline vehicles.
Thanks, Anna. Let's see, anonymous, things are shifting around here. Here's anonymous, can you translate the 50-mile UDDS and 200-mile 2-cycle to EPA real world values? Ideally, would be talking more real world range. I think you might have already addressed that one, but something similar.
Yeah, a good rule of thumb is about 70% of those test values. If you multiply them by 70%, then you can get a more closer to real world value, but it varies with manufacturer and the efficiency of the vehicle and all sorts of things. So, but a good rule of thumb is take 70% of that test range.
Thanks, Anna. Let's see here. Michael Taylor asks, with the current adapters, is there a way to lock into the car until the charging is done? This would allow multiple people to share a charger without worrying they're unplugging their neighbor's car too soon. I don't know if anyone can answer that question. I believe that is different cars have that ability to,
right,
to lock the charger into the charger, you know, the charging adapter into the car so that people don't unplug you. I think some cars do have that feature. I'm not sure if they all do. So
yeah, it wouldn't be something that we would mandate, but I could see why that's either frustrating or something that you'd want as a feature. But as Lisa said, many manufacturers offer that in their EVs, but it's not a CARB standard.
yeah, so we have a lot of questions that I think, here's one about AC credits. I'm trying to, you know, answer different types of questions here. So when you say that AC credits will still be available, will they continue to include both efficiency and leakage credits? From Ross Gatsky.
This is how I try to take this question. Yes, that is our current thinking.
Great. And then here is from Edward Ponage. Which model year will OBD be required on ZEVs?
So we're not, I think calling it OBD is a bit of a stretch because we're not actually talking about requiring prescribed diagnostics for the vehicle. We are talking about requiring some standardized data though. So in general, we've been looking at requirements, you know, for post 2025 model year. And I think we'd have to look at something that makes sense for a phase-in. The standardization in OBD, as you know, Tim, is going through some changes right at that time. So there may be something else that makes sense to phase in with that change to the UDS kind of version of 1979 or not. We're still looking at that, but it's something in the 26 and later model year and probably a phase in. And again, I think OBD is a bit of a misnomer. It's about a standardized connector and some standardized data. I guess that goes to the previous question, Lisa, if you want me to cover Bernie Carr's question as well. That data requirements. So in our service information proposal on making service information available for zero-emission vehicles, just like they are for gasoline vehicles, yes, our proposal would be to do the same stuff that's required for gasoline. Make the information available for text to buy, make the OEM tools available for text to buy, and provisions in there for the OEMs to work with aftermarket tool providers and aftermarket service information providers to license information to replicate that kind of stuff in their tooling as well. Look at that, two for one for you, Lisa.
Thanks, Mike. And I guess it sounds like people said people can't hear me that well, so I'll try to speak up. And we just have I'm going to do one more question kind of from the first section, so that trying to, we have one more question we can ask, and this is kind of at the top here. So it says from Amaya Joshi, incentives for low-income consumers go till the beginning of the next decade. This suggests that CARB believes that EVs will be more expensive than regular ICE till that time frame. Is that correct? Is that a correct interpretation? If battery breakthroughs make EVs cheaper than ICE by 2028, say, would these incentives still be in place? I guess this is maybe more of a incentives question. Just wanted to give that first section.
Lisa, and I'll just note and refer folks to our previous workshops and materials there on our cost modeling for EVs. And when we're thinking that those maybe, reach cost parity or not with ICE vehicles, we have some information in our previous workshop materials, and I'll provide a link to that in response.
Thanks, Marissa. And I think right now, given we're about 5 minutes to the hour, just maybe thank you everyone for all your questions. They were really great, and we're sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but please feel free to send follow-up questions to our email address, and I think we'll have some information about that in the closing remarks. So I'll turn it, I think, back over to Marissa at this point.
I'm sorry,
Shobna.
Go ahead. Yeah, thanks, Lisa.
Yeah, no problem. Good evening. My name is Shobna Sani, and I will walk through the last few slides here and wrap up this workshop. We appreciate you staying on this long, and I promise we're almost done. Just a few more slides. I want to walk through the requirements that are part of the Standardized Regulatory Impact Assessment Process, or SRIA, which is required for major regulations. Next slide, please. As a reminder, the SRIA is a point-in-time estimate of the cost and benefits that would result from the proposed regulation. In addition to estimating costs and benefits of the proposal presented here today, state agencies must also evaluate and solicit for alternatives to the proposal. The Air Resources Board welcomes public input on alternatives to the draft regulatory proposal discussed in this workshop. In particular, we encourage public input on alternative approaches that may yield the same or greater benefits than those associated with the proposed regulation, or alternatives that may achieve the goals at lower cost. Next slide, please. All alternatives we're seeking should be associated with the same or greater benefits than those presented, or achieve the same goals at a lower cost, as mentioned in the last slide. This slide includes additional language as guidance for submitting your economic alternatives. When submitting your alternatives, please ensure that the submission discusses the alternative's ability to fulfill the purposes of the draft regulatory proposal as the Air Resources Board has presented it, by submitting associated costs and benefits and a clear description of inputs and the calculations used. Next slide, please. So to wrap up this presentation, here's the timeline until our board hearing, which is scheduled for June of next year. As you can see, so far we have held 2 workshops leading up to this one in August. All workshop materials and subsequent documents have been posted on our website. Our fall workshop will present our draft proposal, and we hope to release some draft regulatory language by that time as well. So make sure that you I think in our chat, we've already put our link for our rulemaking page, and that will be the page that houses most of our workshop slides, as well as any of the materials that we have for our workshops in the past, as well as workshops going forward. Next slide, please. We shared this information earlier, but I just wanted to remind everyone that additional questions can be emailed to us at cleancars@arb.ca.gov. Written comments may be submitted using our ACC II workshop number 3 informal comment submittal form that's linked here, and it's also in the chat. Public comments that have been submitted can be viewed on our ACC II workshop comment log webpage, which links here on the slide, and also there's a link to it in the chat for the workshop. Please subscribe to our email list so that you are notified of future workshops or events and when documents are posted on our website. And if you would like to discuss the Advanced Clean Cars 2 rulemaking with us in more detail, please do not hesitate to reach out to us using the same email address, cleancars@arb.ca.gov. I think this is our last slide. So with that, thank you very much for participating in today's workshop. And we'll see you again in the fall. I know that we still have some questions that we haven't answered that are in the Q&A box. So I think we'll go ahead and try to answer those in the Q&A box to you. And also, if we haven't gotten to them by the end of this workshop, we will email the answers as well if we have that. And I don't know, Lisa, do we have emails attached to those Q&As?
Yeah, because everyone registered, we should have everyone's email address.
Okay. Okay, so the questions that we did not answer in the boxes today, in the Q&A box today, we will send an answer to you through email. So that's all we had.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Have a good evening.